You want to get the clarity and confidence from God first. And to do that, you're going to need to spend time in prayer, surround yourself with people who give you counsel. If you're married, you want to be in alignment with your spouse.
Welcome back to the Catholic Founders Podcast. If you're new here, our goal is to create an army of Catholic business owners who are dedicated to carrying out God's will in the world. We use this podcast as a way to meet other Catholic business owners and learn from them on how they implemented their faith into their businesses. This way, we can imitate them and we can all build better together. The goal is for this to be very tactical and tangible. We want to really focus on action over theory. And today we have a really fun episode with you. Our guest is Max Haben, the creator of the Contemplative Dad, a YouTube channel that he started on his own, mainly to improve his own ability to be present with his children in the modern era. And his story is that a few months ago, he had a job with the St. Paul Center, which ended, and he decided to focus his efforts on growing the channel. A few weeks after that, he actually had a video go viral, so he decided to double down. And our conversation today has a few main components. Number one, we spend a lot of time, probably the first half of the episode, discussing the tension between putting your financial success on your own shoulders versus trusting on God to really provide for you and provide for your daily bread. And I think that this really gets at the heart of what many Catholics feel when they are debating starting their own businesses or when they're debating staying in their job, right? There's a couple tensions there we talk about. Then after that, he gives us a breakdown of how you can make money on YouTube, the kind of different methods of monetizing a YouTube channel, and then he gives some core points on how to successfully build a YouTube channel and who might want to be interested in considering that. Then we wrap up with a handful of rapid fire questions. And before we start the show, if you are looking for a community of other Catholic entrepreneurs, join the Catholic Founders Guild today. It's $10 a month or $100 a year, so anybody can afford it. All you have to do is go to Substack and click upgrade to paid to get started. All right, enjoy the episode. All right, welcome to the pod, Max. How you doing?
I'm doing great. It's good to be here. Thanks for having me, Silas.
It's great to have another Midwest boy on the call. We're not that far away. We could have probably recorded this in person if I had a little extra time to come over to Minneapolis.
That's right. That's right. Well, I'm in Steubenville now, so it would have been a
Oh,
little
you
bit
are?
longer of a drive. Yeah, not
Okay.
quite, not quite in the Midwest. I guess this would be considered East Coast, Eastern part of the country, but yeah, definitely Midwest roots from the Twin Cities there, and lived in Duluth for a few years. What part you from? Wisconsin, right?
Yeah. I'm in Central Wisconsin
Okay.
currently. We'll be moving to Nashville pretty soon though. So no longer Midwest boy. I don't know if
Oh,
people
wow.
if people consider me a truly in the South. I don't know if that counts, if Nashville counts, but I'm definitely getting to
Yeah.
warmer places and airports.
Yeah, Nashville would be fun.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting. But anyways, man, you've had a pretty exciting past few months. So can you just tell us a little bit about kind of this past few months in your journey in business and life in general?
Yeah, I this last few months I've started up the Contemplative Dad, which is my YouTube channel. And sort of, I guess, if I'm a Catholic founder, that's what I've founded most recently. And so I've been working on that. Before that, I was had a stint as a filmmaker. I was a film director for a few years and did a lot of music videos and documentaries, branded content. And then around COVID, I ended up pivoting into a marketing role and took a job in the marketing industry. And over the last, 5 to 6 years, I've really been living in that sort of branding, marketing, advertising world, but very much still, I think, a focus on media and media production and using organic content to grow social media platforms and YouTube channels and create content. And so, kind of that mix of media background and filmmaking and marketing and branding is really where I've been living for the last 10 years or so. And last year I was working with the St. Paul Center, working for Scott Hahn, and here in Steubenville, and that was great. It was an amazing experience, but started to realize that I had this entrepreneurial itch that I'd had for a while. I've always kind of fluctuated between self-employment and full-time employment, and around January I decided I had this idea to start the Contemplative Dad YouTube channel, and just sort of had a hunch that I needed to start working on this. And then in April of this year, I ended up parting ways with the St. Paul Center and have been really just focusing on the YouTube channel and growing that, and kind of doing my own thing. And so, yeah, that's kind of brought me to where I am now.
Yeah, I find it very fascinating. I have a couple friends in the media and film world, and it's almost very interesting because it's kind of like the old school way that a lot of people had their own practices of, maybe they were a carpenter or, a stonemason or whatnot. but you have to kind of rely on God for your next gig, right? Like when you're doing film directing or being a cinematographer, whatever it is, right? I'm not super familiar with the whole world, but it's a very like focus on the your this the daily bread prayer aspect is kind of like really front and center in your life. Have you experienced that or seen that with a lot of your friends in this industry?
Yeah, for sure. Especially in the film industry. It's funny you mentioned, kind of like craftsmen and stonemasons because I actually have been in the film industry working with film crews and on film sets. And then I've also actually worked in the construction industry. I was a marketing director for a construction company and I got exposed to sort of the trades and manual labor. And there was a lot of similarity in a film crew and a construction crew. I just saw a similar sort of camaraderie and just kind of grinding it out on set or on the site, and a lot of overlap. So yeah, I do. I think it's a good insight. Recently, we have this picture hanging in our bathroom downstairs, which I didn't know what the picture was called until I looked it up recently. It's called the Angelus, and it's this picture of a man and a woman in a field, sort of harvesting some crops. And you've probably seen it. It's a pretty famous painting. And I was just struck by the image. I was, just looking at this couple and kind of picturing them, just really depending and living off the land, and harvesting their crops. And they had a basket. There wasn't much in it, there was a few potatoes or something, and they're down on their knees praying and giving. It looks like they're giving thanks. It looks like they're giving some level of prayer of thanksgiving, is what it appears to me. And I was just struck by that, as I've been, starting this business and kind of embarking on this path of entrepreneurship. It really is like a different level of just dependence on God's providence. And, you think about how people used to live their life, literally dependent on the seasons and the rain, and that determined whether or not they ate or harvested any crops, and whether or not their business succeeded. And so, yeah, it has been an area of reflection for me. I mean, it's a little bit, obviously it's a step of faith and it's a leap of faith, and it takes a lot of trust and there can be a lot of uncertainty. But I do think we live in a world that's gotten very comfortable and very predictable, and this idea of God's providence and really depending on Him for our livelihood is something that is it can be a bit foreign, I think,
Yeah.
for us and just the default mode of kind of being in our world now.
Yeah, I think it's very easy to, even for very faithful Catholics, people who are, really deeply into their faith and serious about their faith, I think it's very easy to just fail to recognize that the baseline standard, if you will, right now is trust in oneself, right? They're like everybody's expected to rely on oneself, all the, financial planning, planning your family, all these things, like it's all focused on your own desires or plans rather than realizing that, at the end of the day, while we do have some control over these things, in reality, most of it comes from God. Like God could just completely throw a wrench in any of these plans at any time, if He wants to, right? There's nothing stopping Him from doing that, and I think it's very difficult for us to remember to recenter that kind of like, hey, I'm going to choose to be very, very dependent on God. I'm going to choose to let this really be in His hands. And I don't know how to get people to think about that. Do you have any kind of core ideas of how to remind people of that? Like, hey, don't worry too much about the finances. Like, oh, I don't want to have another kid because we're not sure about the finances. Like, how do you talk to people about that?
Yeah, well, I think to your point, like I think that self-reliance and like that's it's an illusion of security. I think for a lot of people, I talk about this a lot in my content, around this idea of for me for a long time, I struggled with this tension between like wanting to pursue my entrepreneurial ambitions and also, doing what's right as a father who's the sole breadwinner for my family. My wife stays at home. The family's dependent on me to bring home the bacon, for the financial security. And so for a long time, I really struggled with that. Like, should I be chasing these entrepreneurial dreams? Should I be taking these risks? And, the conviction I've come to is that, whether you have a full-time job or you're self-employed or, whatever you're doing, there is some level of dependence on God. Just because you have a full-time job and you have a paycheck, a predictable paycheck, that predictability does not mean that it's going to be there forever. People get laid off. I think more than ever over the last few years, with the way the world's going, the world's just not as predictable and secure as it used to be, even from when we were growing up, And so I think there is this, yeah, just need for everybody, whether you're employed or an entrepreneur, to really, reflect inwardly and just ask ourselves, like, you know, how are we dependent on God? And, in what ways are we really surrendering to God so that we can, really ultimately see Him provide. Like it's not about like putting yourself in a risky position. It's like your faith gets stronger when you see God show up and provide for you. And so if you want to grow in your faith, then put more dependence on God and put more in His hands.
Yeah, it's very simple to it's a very simple but not practice thing. It's like all you really have to do is spend the time to recognize it, because if you take a bit of time to be contemplative, if you will, and look back at what God is doing in your life already, you'll start to notice it no matter what. Like it's true of everybody. I just don't think a lot of people are willing to sit in that silence. I think there's what is it saying? It's like most of man's problems stem from the fact that he can't sit in a room for in silence for whatever it is, 30 minutes or something.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's very interesting. But I did want to ask you, very briefly on also how you started this. Like, why did you decide? Like, what was a little bit more of the reason why you started the channel back in January time?
Well, you mentioned the contemplative aspect. The contemplative dad really just started. It's evolved since I even named it, but it really started as just a. I think this was really like 3 or 4 years ago after we were coming out of COVID. I started to have just this sense of what you were just talking about. Like I was losing my interior quiet. Like I was losing that sort of ability to listen to God, just with all the noise and distraction and stress and anxiety that we're surrounded with. And as a father of, at the time, 3 kids, now four, I felt my ability to be present was getting weaker, just be present, be a solid sort of presence for my children in the midst of a chaotic and busy life. And so that's when that conviction started to stir in me. Just I think it was a personal conviction, but it was also sensing something happening in the world for everybody that I think in a certain sense, we're getting pulled away from the interior life. We're getting pulled away from a life of slower prayer, meditation, and contemplation, and really being present to God's voice. And that's the biggest thing is there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of voices around us. And how are we slowing down, being quiet enough to listen to what God is saying to us? And so, fast forward to the YouTube channel back in January, I think it naturally sort of just popped into my head. I want to start this YouTube channel where I start talking about this and share, for me, if at first it was just like a place for me to sort of work through some of these tensions I was feeling and spend time in prayer, studying, reading books like you just mentioned, Blaise Pascal Pensie's, thoughts, where he says, all of man's problems stem from his inability to sit alone in a room by himself. We're constantly trying to divert ourselves. Books like The Discernment of Spirits on, St. Ignatius's discernment of spirits, and then talk about those. And that's really how it started. Like all I was doing was kind of these spiritual reflections and talking about that challenge as a father. And then it's kind of evolved to be more of what it is now, which is, I'm talking a lot about my career journey, creative calling, and entrepreneurship, kind of in the context of being, a faithful Christian.
Hmm. Yeah, got it. No, I appreciate that. I think maybe the best part to go from here would be, I want to understand how people can understand when it is time to pursue one of those creative callings, right? So whether it's creative, like truly in the sense of making something like very artistic, like a YouTube channel or art or whatnot, versus art, creative in terms of business, right? Because either way, all of this stems from our nature that we are co-creators with God. So I'm just kind of curious, like, what is your understanding of the circumstances? I know there's no one size fits all answer, but what are the circumstances under which somebody should recognize, hey, it's time for me to take the leap and to kind of really begin pursuing those creative tendencies?
Yeah. Well, I think at first, the first step is spending time in prayer and listening. For me, things really changed when I got a spiritual director, and I started to take some of this to that spiritual director and work through it with him. Um, and through that process, I ended up going through some Ignatian, spiritual discernment stuff and meditating on scripture every day. I did this for like 16 weeks. I just meditated on scripture every day. And through that process, I really started to hear God's call clearly. The gifting and the calling had been there for a long time. I've been, I'm almost 40. So it's like I had known and I'd had these, you know, um, I think senses of what God was calling me to as a creator, as an artist, the entrepreneurial tendencies, but I had never really taken the time to get the clarity and discernment that I needed to listen to God's voice. And so I wish I would have done that earlier, but it took a while. I'm a slow learner. That'd be my first piece of advice for anybody that is wrestling with this is you want to get the clarity and confidence from God first. And to do that, you're going to need to spend time in prayer. You're going to want to surround yourself with other people who can speak into that, people who are wiser than you that can give you counsel. If you're married, you want to be in alignment with your wife and your spouse. I mean, I think that's really important. I was not always in alignment with my wife on my career decisions, and that caused damage and distrust, and so yeah, I think that's number one. And then number two, once you do start to get that clarity and confidence, whatever that is for you, if it's to create art, if it's to start a creative project or start a business, from there it's really about having the courage to step out in faith, to really respond to what God is calling you to.
Jim Rohn famously said, "You're the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with." How would you like those 5 people to be other ambitious and faithful Catholic business owners? As part of this Catholic Founders Project, we've created a vetted community of Catholic business owners. Originally, I actually started this because I always felt drawn to the Catholic business owners that I would meet in real life. The people who were not afraid to pursue ambitious goals, but who were also deeply committed to their faith. I just felt very drawn to them. I wanted to bring them together. So if you'd like to surround yourself with people like this, if you're kind of like me, consider becoming a member of the Catholic Founders Guild. We have 2 to 3 monthly calls, a member directory, bonus paid content, and a community group chat that kind of serves as your board of advisors whenever you run into challenges. There's so much great wisdom that gets shared in there on a weekly basis. To join, just go to our Substack and click upgrade to paid today. It's only $10 a month or $100 a year, so literally anybody can afford it. We want this to be accessible to all business owners. What are you waiting for? Join your tribe of Catholic business owners today. So for you, once you had gotten the channel going, I guess what was the specific circumstances that made you realize that you were going to really kind of dive deep into this? Because you had started it kind of as a side project, but then moved into it full time. Was that like, specific work circumstances that you found yourself in, or was it just that you said, "Hey, I'm going to really focus on this full time now"?
Yeah, well, once the job ended with the St. Paul Center, I had some time on my hands and kind of this transition period where I was really thinking through what did I want to do next. And like I said, I'd had this kind of sort of entrepreneurial itch for a while. And I think for a long time I'd been helping other organizations, helping other people use social media, use YouTube, and content marketing to grow their businesses. And I had this sort of area of expertise and this knowledge, and I thought, maybe I could do this myself. Maybe I could do this for myself. And so I'd already started the channel. It didn't really have a lot of traction yet, but now I had this time to put into it. And so, on one hand, I was telling my wife, "No, don't worry, I'm going to be applying for a job. I'm applying for jobs. I'm going to, look for jobs." But on the other hand, I was sort of like, well, maybe if I can, get this YouTube thing going, then I could make that my job. And so that's kind of the place I was in. Right after, right, very shortly after that, actually, I worked on a video where I talked about running from God's calling, and I started, just talk about my career journey and what God was doing in my life, and that video just took off. It's almost got like 100,000 views now, and it really kickstarted my channel. So it was about that time that I started to see, okay, I think this is getting some traction. This could become something, and it's still a work in progress, but it is continuing to grow, and it's been something that's opened up a number of different opportunities for me in this area of sort of YouTube growth and coaching and whatnot. And so yeah, that's kind of how it happened. And it's still it's I'm certainly not sitting here saying like I've sort of ascended the mountain and I'm looking down and at this success story. It's still very much a work in progress. I'm kind of building this thing in public and learning a long way to go, but there's some traction there.
Yeah, I find it very fascinating just like thinking sometimes about the tools that we have at our disposal, things like social media that can, allow people to go viral or have opportunities to reach success. But it's almost like, there is obviously an algorithm involved, but and you can to an extent hack it, but also God knows when to give you the right things, right? So if you had that during your time still working with the St. Paul Center, that may have been, a very different conversation or thought process you had versus, hey, this is actually a sign, like I don't have the opportunity, don't have the job anymore. So now this opportunity presents itself, and then we can lean into it. I also find it fascinating that usually when people fully commit their focus and their energy towards something creative like this, it tends to do a lot better. I'm constantly having this tension right now. It's like running my business and running the Catholic Founders Project. Like, I feel like I have to do the Catholic Founders Project because it's what God's calling me to do. So I keep doing it, even though like it doesn't really make me money, and it doesn't pay the bills, at least that's for sure. But I just feel like I have to do it. I know it could be better if it's the only thing I did, but also it's like I said, not going to pay the bills, at least not to my knowledge. So maybe I'm in this bucket too, and maybe I should reflect afterwards. But I guess the one thing I've really want to ask about after you really began to work on this is how do you balance how much to work? Because with any creative pursuit, any of your own business, especially if you have a family, you have kids, it's very easy to just throw yourself fully into the work and say, you know what, I need to be out there just like really hustling to make this work in order to pay the bills. But yet you still have responsibilities to your wife and your children and to your community. So how do you decide how much to work?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm glad you asked it because it's been another conviction of mine for a long time. I love hard work. I think work ethic is a very valuable thing. But I think another symptom of our society and our culture that I think is crept into the church as well is that we have to maximize our hustle, and the kind of the most impressive, maximal performance and achievement and growth is like what everybody should be aiming for. And for a long time I've had this conviction that there's a book by Joseph Pieper, who's a Catholic philosopher, called Leisure, the Basis of Culture. And I remember reading that book back in college, and really just having my eyes open to this reality of just like the workaholic culture that we live in, and how that's really counter to the gospel. It's counter to a Catholic worldview, which really has leisure um, at the center of culture. Really, like everything should be working to the Sabbath. It should be working towards rest and festivity and culture, and I think in our society, it's the reverse. Work is the basis of life, and even when we rest and we take breaks, it's to go back to work. It's really at the center. And I think there's just a temptation to uphold workaholism as a virtue. So for me, and I'm not beyond that. I'm certainly not this contemplative hermit monk, running a business by any means. I'm trying to start a business, and that takes a lot of, elbow grease and hustle. And, I told you this morning I was up at 5 a.m., just getting some shots for a new video, even though, I'd been up all night with the baby and needed sleep. But, it's something that I'm reminding myself as I start this business. I really have this vision. I think a lot of the motivation for starting this business is to explore, can I use entrepreneurship and self-employment to build a lifestyle that is more integrated, that is built around family, culture, music, eating good food, maybe growing some vegetables, but really creating this lifestyle that isn't just about work. It's not just centered on going off to work for 45, 50, 40 to 50 hours a week. It's a more integrated, holistic lifestyle. I think it's more of a lifestyle business that I'm trying to build. And so I think at the beginning, it's good to just keep reminding myself, or finding myself having to, just continue to get, back to that initial motivation, and that desire, which is like, I'm not trying to create more work for myself. I'm not trying to start a business because I want to be, the next Elon Musk. Like, I'm starting a business because I want to become more free. I want more freedom in my life. Yes, financial freedom. Yes, the freedom to do the work I want, but I also want the freedom to not work when I don't want to work. And, if I want to spend time with my family for a morning and go for a walk or go for a hike, like, I want the freedom to be able to do that. And I want spiritual freedom too. Like, I don't want to be bound by work. I don't want to be bound by this sort of relentless diversion and need to fill this God-sized hole with more work and distraction or achievement to sort of, justify my existence. And so that, and again, I'm not, I'm preaching to myself when I say that. That's, it's not an accusation towards anyone else. Like, this is something that I'm kind of reflecting on and trying to work through. So it's a great question. And really, it is like the whole idea of the contemplative dad is this to me, it's like, can I build a contemplative business? Can I be a contemplative entrepreneur and a contemplative content creator? And I think that's going to really inform how I show up in this next season. So
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things there that I would just reflect on. It's like there's this tension between the need to put money to provide financially for your family and the need to create the space for you to be fulfill your first duties to God and to your family. So there's that tension, and then there's also the tension of when you are an entrepreneur, there's more quote unquote resting on your shoulders. So you have to, show up basically. But on the other hand, just because you work a job doesn't mean there's nothing resting on your shoulders. Actually, there's in some cases more resting on your shoulders because you are at the mercy of somebody else who, in many cases, I don't think a lot of us have had Catholic employers. Maybe some people listening to this have had a lot of Catholic employers, but the average Catholic doesn't work for some kind of really human-centered organization. They're usually big corporations who don't care about you at the end of the day, and if you don't show up properly, you're going to be let go. You're going to be fired. And I think that this is something that a lot of people have this myth about, right? You mentioned it earlier that it is really just an illusion, this security of having a job, where you're actually in more ways you're kind of like a slave to the company. Even if you have a good good relationship with your boss and good coworkers, right? You have to show up at all costs, right? Unless they're like highly flexible organization, which is pretty rare these days. So just having people recognize this, that separate these two different things out, right? Job security is one, reliance on God is one, and then reliance on yourself, but also the need to integrate your spiritual life as the core thing, right? Having a business, yes, you have more flexibility to do these things. You can go to daily mass, you can have your morning routine and everything. You also have to make sure you do have discipline to show up and do the work for your business. It's not like it's just going to come naturally, come easily. So I don't think we have a particular answer that we can give anybody, but I just want people to really reflect on this. If they're in a position of considering to start a business or some kind of creative project, or they are convinced that job security is super important, it's the most responsible thing to do. There's definitely two sides of this coin, and people need to really think about that. So
just one follow up to that is that, I think I get a little bit of flack in my YouTube comments for this, but I really do believe that anybody can have their own business, especially in 2025. Like, there's a quote from Naval Ravikant, who's, one of my favorite authors and content creators. And, he's got this quote where he says, there's 9 billion people in the world. And my hope is that one day there'd be 9 billion businesses. And, that might sound crazy, but his point with that is not that like everybody can have their own business, not that everybody will have their own business, but that it's possible for anybody to have their own business nowadays. Like, it really is. And, I think that's what I'm trying to demonstrate right now with what I'm doing with the YouTube channel. I do believe that with the technology we have, with the access to the internet, for the decentralization of access to the marketplace, to building an audience, what have you, like anybody can go and show up on these platforms and start to talk about their expertise, can start to build a business around who they are and their experiences, their unique point of view, and they can turn that into income. They can turn that into a business. Like, it's a possibility. Not everybody's going to do that. Not everybody's going to want to do that, but more people can do that now, and they can start to free themselves up in a way that does foster this sort of integrated lifestyle. And so I just wanted to make that point, because I think we think about entrepreneurship sometimes, or business, like starting a business, as this really ambitious, like luxury for the rare few. And maybe in the past it's been like that because there's been, less access, or there's, just more gatekeepers. But I do think that's one of the beautiful things that's happened. There's been plenty of negative things with technology, but there is this opportunity now. And I think more people than realize it could, this opportunity is
mhm.
available to more people than realize it.
Yeah, I mean the biggest issue that you have is you have a misconception about what entrepreneurship is, because primarily the content about entrepreneurship right now is about, making millions and getting a Lamborghini and, doing all this stuff, right? That's not the point of entrepreneurship. It never really has been. It's just a very modernized version of it. I'm sure there's been versions of, the Ty Lopez Here in My Garage people for all of eternity, but it's not the purpose of it. It's to have work and to have fulfillment and have freedom, basically, of your time, and freedom to choose how, your time to worship God, etc. So just keep this in mind: is that the being an entrepreneur should not be synonymous with making, boatloads of money. That's not actually the point of entrepreneurship. It's actually to do good and create some kind of good in the world. and so doing, you capture some value and you provide for your family, right? I'm definitely a believer of the fact that many people, everybody could become a business owner if they wanted to. I firmly believe that, especially with the tools that are out there now. Not a lot of people do, and I get into arguments a lot with my especially with my trad Catholic friends about that you could start a business. They're like, no, that's just too risky. I'm like, well, not really. Like, St. Paul was doing things that were considered risky. St. Joseph left in the middle of the night to go to Egypt. Like, all these things were risky. That doesn't mean they're bad, right? That doesn't mean it's the wrong thing to do. So
Yeah,
just
I mean,
really think about those things.
well, it's we got to be careful again, like with the way that society's set up nowadays. Sort of the world that we live in is a very particular way, right? And we've been ingrained to think in certain ways based on the society we grew up in. But for centuries before this, it was very normal to be self-employed. It was very normal to have your trade, to have your craft, and to provide for your life, to have your farm. And that was the provision. That was the source of income. Like this whole idea of being an employee for a big company and working in a cubicle or an office for 40 hours a week. This is a very new reality for people to make a living. And it came about because of a very certain set of circumstances, in the evolution of work over the last century. And so, and again, and we can't get that confused with what it means to be a provider and a protector for your family. What it means to be a good Catholic. I think that's an area that we need to have a conversation around in the church, is just making sure that we're understanding what's coming from God, like what's God's voice, what is actual church teaching, like historically, what is it, what does the nature and dignity of work look like for man, and not confusing that with like, okay, this is the ideal model of what it looks like to be a holy Catholic husband.
Yeah, and I guess one thing I would just call back to what I mentioned earlier is this need for, you don't have to live a lavish lifestyle. This idea that you have to go on vacation every year and have all these things that are common in the world. That's what sets an unrealistic expectation of the income that you need. I'm not saying you shouldn't pursue, making good money for your family, but people believe that they quote unquote need all of these things of the world, right? Which is completely disconnected from what it means to try to become a saint. To become a saint, we're trying to disconnect our desire or attachment to the world in all things. So if you have two things, if you have detachment from the world and willingness to live in a, let's call it below current standards kind of living, right? I'm not saying you can't have a good life, but the way the world says that the bare minimum is so high. I've had many secular friends who just assume that they need these subscriptions to everything, and they say it's impossible to have all these kids because you can't afford to do all of these things. And I say, well, who said that those are requirements? So number one, detaching yourself from those requirements, because that's not actually sainthood at all. And if you do that, then your need of income is lower. Then you can also build a business that doesn't have to be making millions and millions of dollars a year. You can be making, 70, 80 grand, 100 grand a year and still be getting by with your family, because you have two things in place. And then I think the beautiful aspect of this is that when people have really, again, detached from the world and they desire to, pursue a saintly life, and they put their trust in God that He will provide for them financially when they start their businesses. They do have to inculcate virtue in how they run the business, obviously. But then it gives this amazing opportunity for God to really take whatever it is that they're building, if this person is fully detached from the world, and turn it up to 11. Like something that maybe seem like, hey, maybe I can make just enough to get by and to provide for my family. Maybe he then decides, guess what? It's now time for something amazing. And then he builds that into something really, really big because they put their trust in God. And he can then just take whatever they've done and turn it up, like multiply it by 1,000x. And this is to me the most exciting thing. And this is why I want more Catholics to start businesses, is this opportunity to partner with God, basically.
Oh, I like that idea. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point. One of the things I'm really grateful is I have a very frugal wife. I am not that way. I don't spend a lot, but I just do. It's like I want the money to come in, but I don't want to look at like a spreadsheet. I don't want to look at a budget. And she has just done such an incredible job of helping us, early in our marriage, pay off our student loans, my student loans mainly. We've been we just haven't made a lot of, extra spending decisions. Um, and, I think that's put us in a position where we can actually take the time to invest and have that luxury. Because I agree with you 100%. I think that's not as theological, but it's just more like practical, life and finance, Dave Ramsey type stuff, which is like just make smarter decisions, with your money, and make decisions. It's interesting how the gospel ends up helping us, practically as well. When we're detached from the things of the world, it can put us in a better position to actually pursue God's call and what He's calling us to. So yeah, I agree 100% with that reality.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. I've been pretty fascinated to try to understand the business of YouTube, right? Because that's kind of like the primary thing here. So could you just maybe give us a bit of a breakdown on what somebody can reasonably expect to make from YouTube? And is it going to be primarily from ads? Is it going to be from building a business that goes along with it? Just break down some of those basics for somebody who is considering this route for themselves.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways you can make money from YouTube. I think the main idea is that what people get wrong about YouTube is they think it's just another social media platform. Like, oh yeah, I gotta have my Instagram account, I gotta have my Facebook and my Twitter, and then we should be using YouTube probably, and get some videos up. YouTube is really the best way for me to put it is like it's like the evolution of television, and I think it's like television but infinitely, more powerful and infinitely more effective. And really, it's an opportunity for anybody to show up and start their own channel. Okay, so like you had the TV, traditionally the TV had a certain number of channels and it was limited to those channels, and there was one box that everybody had to gather around, and there was a lot of limitation and boundaries to that channel, right? If you wanted to watch a different channel, you had to flip to the next channel, but there wasn't a lot of options. And now with YouTube, what we have is the opportunity for anybody, not just the TV networks, like any person, any individual, any business, can go and set up their channel and start to build an audience around that channel. And then you have this powerful thing called the algorithm, which will, channel in your content that you're producing, and they'll put it in front of the right exact person. Like it's become scary good at finding that audience for you. So anyways, I just say that to preface is like when you're starting a YouTube channel, what you're starting is you're starting literally like your own TV channel. People are watching YouTube on TV more than they're watching it on their computers or phones now. Like you are starting your own distribution channel. And if you have a distribution channel, then you can sell whatever you want, like people will come and advertise on your channel. You can sell products on your channel. You can sell services. You can create coffee mugs and sell. It's like you can do so many different things if you have that channel and you have that audience that's watching and following your content and your brand. So with all that to say, there's a number of different ways. It's like with any distribution channel, like, there's a number of different ways you can really sell a lot of different things. Some of the common ways early on that you can monetize are through advertising, ad spend, or AdSense on Google. So Google owns YouTube, and so once you hit a certain threshold of followers, subscribers, views, watch hours, which can take a while, but if you're doing it right, it can happen pretty quickly too. And once that happens, then you're able to get ad dollars from the ads that are running on your videos. Now that's typically not going to be something that like you live off of anytime soon. I mean, if you're Matt Fradd, maybe you're able, maybe that's a considerable amount of income, but most YouTubers are diversifying their streams of revenue into other areas. Another area would be brand deals. So like once you get a certain number of subscribers, you're going to start getting brands reaching out to you, wondering about, hey, can we sponsor a video, can we sponsor your channel, and that can become a considerable revenue stream. You can obviously set up your own shop on YouTube. They have like a shop feature where you can literally sell products. I'm thinking about I talk a lot about coffee in my videos. One of my sort of cues is we're going to keep going, but first I need some more coffee. And so I've been thinking about just a Contemplative Dad coffee mug that I can sell. And then a couple other ways that I think are that I'm currently uh, working on are getting people off of YouTube into either some sort of service or offer. And right now I have a Substack channel as well. So a lot of my YouTube audience is I'm able to drive them over to a Substack newsletter, and there's a paid option to upgrade on the Substack as well. So I just put a video on how I grew my channel on YouTube to 10,000 subscribers in 3 months, and I kind of talked a little bit about that on the channel, but then I put a link in the description. If you want to take a course on how to do this, you can go over to my Substack, and you can sign up for my Substack and take the course. So that's just that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's a number of other ways as well, but that's the beauty of YouTube is it's really you can create multiple streams of revenue and income, which helps to diversify things, so you're not putting all your eggs in one basket. Um, and yeah, it's just kind of endless opportunities.
Yeah, I think that's a very good breakdown. Just to, I guess the point for people to understand is that it's not just something that happens automatic. Like if you can get the views and everything, that gives you, like you said, the distribution, which is important to then be able to sell a product that's helpful for your audience, right? You don't want to just sell anything that doesn't feel on brand, right? Like you mentioned, doing a coffee mug because that's a common thing in your videos. You wouldn't want to, suddenly be selling some kind of special vacuum or broom or something. It probably wouldn't make a lot of sense. So you want to make sure you stay consistent with that. But just so everybody understands, like there is plenty of ways to monetize, is what you're pointing out. There's plenty of ways to be able to make income off of these projects. You just have to recognize it, right? Don't just assume it's all from from ad dollars. I think a lot of people for some reason don't think past what they just see on the surface, and they just assume that the money comes easily. So I appreciate you breaking that down. I guess for you, like, do you have any particular vision of where you want to build this into? Because you talk a little bit about it being kind of you want to build a one man business. Is that what you intend to try to build with it? Like, what are the core things that you want to kind of create if it was in your hands to turn this into something that you kind of envision?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that it's evolving, and it's something I'm building the plane as I'm flying it, so to speak. And, I think right now, the thing that I'm building is a media company, is really what it is. These videos that I'm putting on YouTube, I mean, that's really like the product. And what I enjoy doing the most is creating the videos. And, they're helping people, it's serving people. Like I'm just getting a ton of really positive feedback that the videos themselves in themselves are just really valuable. And so that's really like the core vision of what I'm trying to do is just grow the YouTube channel. Like I want that to be as big as possible, reach as many people as possible, and just be putting my time into creating those videos and doing better videos. I do have a coaching offer as well right now. I'm starting to do some one-to-one coaching, and then also I have a group cohort that I'm gonna be starting next month with a kind of a small group of creatives and aspiring entrepreneurs who are trying to discern God's call and start their business or start their project. And we're gonna kind of do that together, which I really enjoyed talking to people one-to-one. I think that's been like, other than actually just creating the content itself and doing interviews with other contemplative dads, the one-to-one is where I feel like I can really start, go deeper and help people more, because I think the YouTube videos are like stirring up a lot of inspiration and people are getting energized from them. They're like, man, like you're speaking to something, you're inspiring me, and I want to do something about this. But it's like, how do I do it? It can be obviously like a big leap to make if you're thinking about leaving your job or starting a
Mhm.
business. Like that's not something you just want to do, on a whim. And so I like the one-to-one setting. Beyond that, I think just I think my mindset right now is if the YouTube channel grows, I think everything's going to trickle down from that, and the opportunities will come. I've considered writing a book at some point, but I think that's the beautiful thing about YouTube. I just think that if you have that audience, you look at someone like Matt Fradd and what he's done and the model he's built, like he really has become probably the number one media influencer, media company in the Catholic world. And, he's writing books. He's got, different things going on. He just started a business, with Truthfully. So I'm sure that wasn't something that when he set out to start his YouTube channel, like he necessarily had everything figured out. I think as he's built the media company, like the opportunities just come.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. Yeah, I also think it's going to be, to an extent, you just have to see where God brings it, right? And this is the dilemma of planning in general. It's like you can plan so many things, but God usually, if you're open to what He's got in store for you, He'll show you a lot better things or different things than you ever thought of. So I do want to ask just a couple basics then, I guess, for you, for people who are, I guess, just high level. What kind of businesses or people should consider building a YouTube channel for their business specifically? Not necessarily if they want to just make it a business, but I'm saying, like, say I run another business and I want to build a YouTube channel. Who should that be? Like, what are the circumstances of how to create it, and what are just like the very basic principles that somebody needs to actually have success on it? Because I'm sure you can't just record a video and pop it up there on YouTube and assume it's going to be good.
Yeah, I mean, I think my easy cop out answer to that is like everybody should. Like I think any individual who is interested in, even if you're not interested in building a business, I think there's just so much fruit that can come and benefit that can come from like sharing your gifts or sharing your story and sharing your expertise, even if you're a full-time employee. Like building a personal brand. That's really what we're talking about. We're talking about starting a YouTube channel, right? It's like you're building a brand around yourself in a certain sense. And and so I just think that's like a win for anybody who wants to do it. I think there's good things that are going to come from that. And then on the business side, like for corporate organizations, I think every business should be investing in YouTube. Like I said before, I think everybody kind of goes to Instagram, Twitter, and X, or Twitter X now, and and TikTok, more recently, because it's a little bit lower barrier to entry, and it kind of feel everybody's there. The thing about YouTube is like most people aren't really investing in it. If they are, they're not doing it very well. And so you can stand out really quickly if you do it well and you take the time to invest in it. And I would argue that it's probably the number one place you should be investing in when it comes to all these different platforms. That's my personal opinion. When you're getting started, just a few basic principles. I talked about the course I put out on Substack. I have a course right now, a little mini course on this, and these are the few principles that I talk about in that course. Is um, number one, create the thing that you want to exist that doesn't exist yet. So there's a lot of noise in the world, and that can kind of be a stumbling block for people when they start a YouTube channel or when they get on YouTube and they're like, what should I be talking about? How should I be showing up? There's already a channel on this. I'm a Catholic apostolate, and there's so many other channels on there. Like what's gonna, I don't want to copy anybody. Well, just look out there and think about what doesn't exist that you would want to watch. All right. And a lot of times that's a very personal question. But if you start there and you consider what it is that you would click on and you would watch, well, then there's a good chance that there's another person out there that would also want to watch that. And if one other person would want to watch it, then there's probably 100 other people who would want to watch it, and so on and so forth, right? So, that's a good starting place, just a good exercise to say like, okay, what exists that doesn't. And the other part of that is, it's really easy to copy what's been done, and it's true that we need to look at the trends that are out there and what's working. I think we should take insight from that, but then what we need to do is apply our unique twist on it, our very particular specific point of view or our experiences. If you're an individual, look at your very unique attributes and characteristics and what makes you you, and really double down on that. For me, for a long time, I looked at my career path as like a strike against me, because I had jumped from different jobs. I didn't have a job for more than 1 or 2 years. I was self-employed for a while, and in the film industry for a while, and then in marketing for a construction company. It's like it was all over the place. But then I started to realize, whoa, I've like really weaved together this very interesting narrative, and set of experiences throughout my career that like nobody, like I couldn't have planned it, and I guarantee nobody else has got that same exact trajectory. And so I should lean into that. I should talk about that. I should talk about the trouble and the challenges and the tension, and that's what I've been doing. And it's really, the funny thing is like that specific unique part of my story has really resonated with a lot of people. So there's this really interesting principle that what is specific is the most universal.
One thing,
Yeah.
sorry, just to interrupt there,
Yeah.
I would just point out that very insightful that you mentioned, just so people recognize this, is that the journeys that we are brought on, I didn't ask you this question specifically, but God guides us through these journeys. He puts us in life at a certain period of time, and He brings in people to our lives and takes them out. And all these circumstances, they do create this unique story. And if people are willing to look at it, they can start to begin to understand how is God working in their lives. And then also, this is like you said, also an advantage on the content or the business side of things, that you have unique skills and unique experiences that you can share. And all it takes is just spending a bit of time to recognize that and step
Yeah.
back.
Yes. Absolutely. Everybody's got a story. Everybody's living out their own story. Okay, so like everybody wakes up in the morning. This is the thing you got to remember with content creation or YouTube or any content creation, is that it can sound a bit pessimistic, but people really don't care about you. Like they care about what they need. They care about their story. When their feet hit the ground, like they have their own concerns, and that's what they're thinking about. So when you show up on the internet and there's all this noise and everybody's trying to grab attention, like you really need to think about what's going to make people care. And that is a lot harder said. It's a lot harder done than said. Okay. And
Hmm.
so there's it's going to take practice, and that's probably like the last point, is just like just start to get content out, start to put videos up, have a plan, be intentional, but just know that for a while, you're going to get ignored and people aren't going to be watching your videos. Okay. My first 4 months, I was getting a few views and it, no one was watching, but I took that opportunity to learn. The great thing about the social media platforms and YouTube is that you get a lot of feedback. Okay. People leave comments. You can tell YouTube's got great analytics. You can tell how long people are watching, when they fall off the video. So you can make refinements as you go. And you're going to want that time to learn and find your voice anyways. You're not going to want, to take off right away because you need some time to get comfortable and find your voice and know what it is you want to focus in on. So yeah, that would be my encouragement. Think about what you want to exist that doesn't exist. Tell your authentic story, be yourself so that you're not, just another copycat out in the marketplace. And then thirdly, just be patient, keep showing up. Most people don't make it. Most people fail because they stop or they don't start. That's really the number one reason people don't succeed on YouTube.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I appreciate the context there. So I think we've covered pretty much all of the core things that I want to get to today, at least most of them, and we're running out of time here. So I'll just let's wrap up with some rapid fire questions here. Are there any specific scriptures that really inspire you? It doesn't have to be specifically scripture, but a kind of religious reading that inspires you from an entrepreneurial perspective.
Yeah, I've been immersed in scripture as of late. It's been something I've really been leaning on during this season, to hear God's voice and to find clarity and direction. One of the verses that came up most recently that I did a video on actually was Luke chapter 5, verse 1 through 11. It's the story of when Jesus calls the disciples from the boat. He approaches them. They've been fishing all night. They've been toiling and haven't caught anything. Jesus kind of famously says, "Why don't you try casting your nets to the other side of the boat into the deep water?" Peter gives him a kind of a crazy look, you can imagine, and says, "All right, whatever you say." Of course, they pull up an abundance of fish. The nets are full, overflowing, and the reaction then is to leave their nets and leave their boats behind and follow Jesus. They leave everything and follow him. So I'm no theologian. I'm not offering an objective interpretation of what this verse means for entrepreneurs and for people who are thinking about leaving their job. But for me personally, in this season of literally leaving behind full-time employment and deciding to start a business, to read this story and meditate on these disciples who were literally dependent upon fishing for their livelihood. This was their job. Like, this was their career, and they knew what they were doing. And Jesus comes in and tells them to throw their nets where typically they wouldn't expect to catch fish. It's just an incredible story to meditate on for an entrepreneur and for someone who's trying to build a business contemplatively, trying to build a business on faith and trust in God. So that would be one that's really resonated recently.
I like that a lot. That's a very good passage. I like that a lot. Who is an entrepreneur that really inspires you and why?
So there's a guy on LinkedIn. His name's Alex Judd, and he's the founder of a company called Path for Growth. And I've been watching his journey. He started his business a few years ago and has kind of been, doing a similar thing to me, just sort of building in public. And he used to work for Dave Ramsey and hosted a podcast there. And he started this business for, kind of like coaching business for entrepreneurs. And he's a faithful Christian. Jesus is at the center of his business. If you go to his website, and it's his whole mission is to help entrepreneurs grow sustainably and grow in a way that glorifies God. And I've just been watching his journey, kind of building this business and growing it. And a lot of the content he creates is just super inspiring and helpful. So I'd say he comes to mind.
Okay. And who is one of your favorite saints and why?
My favorite saints would have to be Saint Teresa of Avila. I've been, I've got a lot, but she's been one lately that I've been referring to and reading through some of her classics, The Interior Castle. Just this whole idea of, for me, the contemplative temperament and trying to build a business on contemplation. I just think that idea of, like I said, from the get-go, this has been about rediscovering the interior life and being able to be present to that and operate not just in business and work, but in my day-to-day life as a dad, as a father, like operating out of that place of deeper contemplation, deeper presence and stillness interiorly. So she's somebody I've been reading a lot lately. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of saints out there that I can go into, but that she comes to mind.
Yeah. And then what is one of your favorite devotions and why?
I'm a big novena guy. I have become, since marrying my wife, we pray a lot of novenas together. One that we have been doing actually right now, we're in the middle of, is a 54-day novena, rosary novena. We've done this once before. Oftentimes it's in regards to work situations. And so God has used it to perform like some amazing miracles. And Our Lady has shown up in just really significant ways. I've got a number of stories. And so we're in the middle of one right now. We're offering our kind of financial provision and security to Our Lady, through Our Lady to Jesus. And and the thing I like about it is you start the first 27 days in the novena, you pray from a place of petition. So you're kind of asking for your petition, and then the second half you're praying in thanksgiving. Even if you haven't gotten that petition answered yet, you're praying in thanksgiving for the answered prayer already. And it's just literally like day by day, I'm seeing God answer that petition in the process of praying it. So that's a big one, and I'd recommend it to anybody.
I like that. I guess finally, where can people reach you? You've mentioned a few things, but what's your call to action for anybody listening?
Well, YouTube, the Contemplative Dad YouTube channel is where I'm the most active, and where you can find my videos that we've talked about. I'm on Substack as well, the Contemplative Dad. That's the other channel that I'm pretty active on. The Substack is really meant to be kind of a deeper dive place where I can share some behind the scenes of how I'm building this business and offer some resources for other content creators or people trying to start their own personal business. So
Awesome, man. Well, it's been really a pleasure having you on. I have to admit, I had a couple, I was like, well, I don't know exactly the things we're going to talk about, but I really appreciate how the discussion evolved, especially at the beginning, around provision and the different dichotomies that we have to work through as entrepreneurs and creatives. So, thank you for coming on, man. I'm really excited to see your journey continue, and we'll be definitely following along.
same to you, man. It's been fun seeing your business grow, and the Catholic Founders newsletter is amazing. And this podcast is a great resource. So keep it up.
Thank you for tuning in today. If you enjoyed the conversation and want to meet other Catholic entrepreneurs just like Max, to build alongside, to have camaraderie with, apply to join our paid community today, the Catholic Founders Guild. We host regular meetups online and in person to learn from each other, help each other, and even do business with each other. It's only $10 a month or $100 a year, so anybody can afford it. To get started today, just go to our Substack and click Upgrade to Paid. Any tier will get you access to the community, the paywalled content, and everything else beyond that. We hope to see you on the other side. Obviously, just keep in mind, we do vet everybody that comes into the community. So once you upgrade to paid, we'll book a call. I'll chat with you and get to make sure that you're a good fit for the community, and then we'll get you in. All right. Thank you so much for tuning in. God bless you, and see you next time.